Howdy men, this night we start with something a little darker, a time of plagues, punishments, and pottage. We are diving into what life became absolutely like in the course of the Middle Ages. Forget the castles and chivalry Hollywood sold you. The fact is you likely would not close a single day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And allow me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always charming to see who is joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, perhaps switch on a fan for that smooth background hum, and let's ease into this night's adventure together. Congratulations! You have just woken up in the year 1325. The good news, you are alive. The bad news, so are the fleas. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress filled with bugs and hay that smells like a barn floor, because it was a barn floor 3 months ago. There is no memory foam, no pillows, and surely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a wool blanket that has not been washed since last winter and now weighs kind of as much as a small cow from the collected grime. You blink awake as the church bell clangs in the distance. It is the medieval version of an alarm clock, only louder and somehow even less merciful. Your home is a wooden hut with one room, no windows, and a charming open-concept floor plan where your family, cattle, and home insects all share the same space. The smell. Oh, it is a fragrant symphony. A subtle blend of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something you pray is not mildew, but no, to your soul possibly it is. Scented candles have not been invented, or even if they had been, they just melt on your dirt floor. You try and stretch, but at once regret it because the air is freezing and your joints pain. You are 22 years old, which in medieval terms is more or less middle-aged. Your backbone creaks like an old wooden door, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by a confused peasant. Getting away from bed is a bet. The floor is either moist from last night's rain, which leaks through the thatched roof, or crusty from something your neighbor's chicken did. Either way, your naked feet are now part of the environment. Oh, and privacy. What is that? Your whole family and maybe a random cousin who just never left are waking up beside you. There is no bedroom, no curtains, no me time, just communal everything. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you are never truly alone because parasites, rodents, and 8 other people are constantly with you. And that is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here. So you have managed to crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors. Congrats. Now nature calls, and it is not calling politely, it is screaming. Here is the part where you start missing the contemporary bathroom. There is no restroom, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush, not even a mildly green with envy plunger in the corner. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is an adventure, a social experiment, and often a small public event. If you are a peasant, your toilet is possibly a wooden bucket behind the house that is already full because, Uncle Wolfston had a hard night after eating bad turnips. The odor is biblical. You hold your breath, do your business, and then here is the kicker. Toss it into the road. Yes, the road. You are supposed to shout something like "Gardez-le" before dumping it out the window. That is Old French for watch out underneath, although frankly no one ever moves fast enough. Streets in medieval cities are open sewers, a fascinating river of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery beverages you would rather not look at. If you are lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congratulations. You get to sit down shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an outhouse where privacy is a fantasy and ventilation is a cruel joke. You may make small talk, but try not to breathe too deeply. Toilet paper. Never heard of it. Most people wipe with straw, leaves, rags, moss, or if they are feeling specifically indulgent, a scrap of wool. Sometimes nothing at all, which may explain why handshakes were not famous yet. And if you are in a fortress, surely it is better, right? Well, kind of. You may have a garderobe, a hole in the wall that drops your waist directly into the moat. Great idea, except that your enemies know this. And yes, attackers sometimes climbed in through the waste chute. Talk about entering via the back door. So, whether you are a farmer or a baron, medieval toileting is an embarrassment ritual. It is cold, it is public, it is dangerous, and it is never not disgusting. One slip on a wet stone path, and you are face first in humanity's leftovers. And you still have not brushed your teeth, but we will get to that next. You survived the bathroom. You deserve a reward, right? Perhaps a pleasant breakfast, something warm, delicious, comforting. Sorry, this is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you could call it that, could be a grim affair. There are no eggs Benedict, no coffee machines sputtering wide awake, and certainly no avocado toast. You sit down or squat near the fireplace, to a wooden bowl of something that looks as if it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew fabricated from something you can discover. Grains, root vegetables, maybe some beans if you are lucky. It has been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, and new ingredients are just dumped on top of the old ones. It is less of a recipe and more of an ongoing edible experiment. On the side, a hunk of bread so hard it can deflect arrows. It is crafted from coarse rye or barley flour, often bulked up with sawdust, ground up acorns, or other creative elements because wheat is a rich man's fantasy. This loaf is not your friend. You do not slice it, you negotiate with it. What about drinks? You are not sipping orange juice or an oat milk latte. You are ingesting beer, yes, beer at 6:00 a.m. Why? Because the water is teeming with parasites and filth, so you start your day with vulnerable ale, low alcohol, high survivability. Children drink it too. No one is happy about it, but at least it may not kill you right now. Need some meat or cheese. Dream on. It is for Sundays and saints' feast days, and only if your Lord is feeling generous. Most peasants do not eat meat more than a few times a year. As for fresh fruit, only when it is in season and not already fermented into wine. And do not even think about spices unless you are royalty. A pinch of pepper costs more than your monthly wages. Salt is valuable enough to be locked away. So you chew your gritty bread, gulp your medieval beer, and try not to think about the rat that may have nibbled your porridge in the night. Breakfast does not energize you, it just happens to you. And now that you are well underfed, it is time to work like your life depends on it, because it truly does. So you have eaten your sad medieval breakfast, and now it is time to dress. Not that it is going to help. Your wardrobe includes precisely one outfit. One. It is a rough wool tunic or linen shift which you have worn every day for months, likely years. There is no such thing as seasonal fashion. There is just, wear this until it disintegrates or gives you a fungal infection. Underclothes. Optional. If you are fortunate, perhaps a linen undertunic. If you are not, well, you are going commando underneath layers of scratchy, sweaty wool, all lovingly stitched together by someone who probably had no idea what a seam was supposed to look like. There is also no washing machine, no soap, and certainly no dry cleaner in sight. So your clothes are stained, stiff, and scented like a compost pile that has been left to marinate in a pigsty. Even if you wanted to wash them, it is not easy. You would have to haul water from a river or well, heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic on a board with ashes or lye, and hang it in the sun that is out about 3 days a year. And do not get me started on footwear. If you own any, they are made of untreated leather, barely stitched together, and offer as much arch support as a banana peel. Most peasants just go barefoot through mud, through dung, through medieval landmines. Okay. Sharp rocks and disease puddles. All this means one thing: your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bed bugs live rent-free on your body. Everyone has them. Nobles lousy, priests itchy, kids running insect farms. No one escapes. You will be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the nearby priest, and no one will even bat an eye. Your skin is raw from rubbing. Your scalp a battlefield of bites. And if you develop a rash, well, too bad. There is no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone, no one to tell you it is probably scabies. You just keep on suffering. And if you are lucky enough to not get an infection, outstanding. That rash will definitely accompany you for the next 6 months like an unwanted medieval sidekick. Now that you are dressed in misery and wrapped in discomfort, it is time to head outside and start working yourself to death. Now that you are fully dressed in itches and damp wool, it is time to flash that morning smile. Except you do not, because in the Middle Ages, smiling is a dangerous game, not emotionally, dentally. There is no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The concept of oral hygiene is about as popular as bathing, that is to say, not very. Some people may chew on a sprig or rinse with wine or vinegar, but for the most part, your teeth are on their own, and they are not doing well. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant. Gums are swollen. And those are not just food stains on your teeth. That is decay. You have got more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. Sugar, while not yet everywhere, is becoming more commonplace, mostly among the rich. Imported at great cost, it is usually used in small cakes or to show off wealth. If you are a noble, congratulations. You get to rot your teeth faster than the peasants. If you are poor, you will do it slowly over the years with fermented bread, gritty porridge, and years of hard chewing. Toothaches. Get used to them. They are like medieval weather, constantly there in the background. The kind of pain that makes you consider praying, drinking, or pulling the tooth out yourself with a pair of pliers. And that is not a funny story. That was the actual treatment. Dentists did not really exist, but barber surgeons did. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair is also pulling your molars out by candlelight with an iron hook and zero anesthesia. Infected tooth. Hope you like fevers, because without antibiotics, it may easily become sepsis and kill you from a toothache. That is right. The same thing that sends us to a pharmacy today may be your funeral in the 1300s. And there is no remedy on the social front either. Kissing. Good luck. Halitosis, bad breath, is everywhere. If you are single, you are not judged by your smile. You are judged by your land and your cattle. In brief, your mouth is a battlefield, and it is losing the battle. Now that your teeth are throbbing, let's head outside because your real job, the one that is going to break your back, is just getting started. Time to go to work. Except there is no office, no desk, no coffee break, and no chance of promotion. Your job, if you are like 90% of the population, is simple. Do not die while laboring for someone else's comfort. You are a peasant. Congratulations. That means you work the land that belongs to a lord who possibly does not remember your name. You rise with the sun and stop only when it disappears behind the trees. Your tools, a wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and whatever bones are still intact in your body. There is no weekend. There is no clocking out. There is only sunrise to sunset, 6 days per week. Sunday is off, but only if you are not harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying feverishly for your infected toe to stop turning black. The work is brutal. Fields are plowed by hand, or with oxen if you are rich enough to afford one. You dig ditches, sow seeds, pull weeds, and carry water until your backbone starts to resemble the letter S. Nobody cares if you are tired. Nobody is asking how your intellectual health is doing. If you are a woman, surprise. You do not just do field work. You also care for children, clean, cook, spin wool, feed animals, and pretend your husband's lice infestation is not slowly migrating to your side of the bed. Children. They start helping out around age 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and a dream of someday not dying of the flu. And if you are one of the few who is not a farmer, perhaps you are a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper. Fine. You still work with fire, chemicals, or animal guts all day in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay. Essentially survival. The perks. Occasional bleeding. Break a bone. Too bad. Get a fever. Drink some warm beer and keep going. You cannot afford to stop, not even for a day, because if you do not work, you do not eat. And if you do not eat, well, medieval Europe has a solution for that. It is called being replaced. So you grip your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep digging, because in the Middle Ages, your job is not a profession. It is a slow-motion endurance test. Now that your back is on fire from laboring in the fields, let's talk about the climate, because in the Middle Ages, temperature is less about seasons and more about ongoing punishment from the sky. Let's start with winter. There is no insulation, no central heating, and no weatherproofing, just wooden walls with gaps you can throw a bird through. Your windows covered with cloth, not glass. The fire in the hearth. Pleasant in principle, but you do not have enough firewood to keep it going because wood is costly and gathering it from the forest is sometimes illegal. Yes, you can be executed for picking up the wrong stick from the wrong forest. You bundle up in your one damp wool tunic, huddle close to the dying embers, and still wake up with your nose frozen. Your feet constantly cold, often damp. Your hands so stiff they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite is not recognized. It is just called bad luck. Now fast forward to summer. Sounds better, right? Wrong. In summer, your home turns into a clay oven. There is no fan, no cross breeze, and certainly no deodorant. You sweat through your layers, but you cannot take away them because showing too much skin is scandalous and also invites sunburn, insect bites, and social judgment. The flies are out in full force, attracted to your unwashed body and the scent of last week's goat stew that is still fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz by your ear while you sleep, assuming you can sleep through the sound of your friends yelling and bobbies crying in the fields. The sun bakes you. No sunblock, no hat unless you fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. And the worst thing, you still have to work. Heat stroke is just referred to as taking a bad turn. So you are either shivering in your own hovel, wondering if your toes will make it to spring, or you are sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe into oblivion. And the only thing that never changes, regardless of the season, your clothes still itch, your food is still bad, and your next job is still waiting. Welcome to climate control, medieval style. There is none. Feeling thirsty. Need to freshen up. Need to splash a little water on your face to wake up from this damp fever dream of a life. Too bad. In medieval times, water is not your friend. It is trying to murder you quietly. Let's start with drinking. The nearby stream looks clear, bubbling and clean, like something out of a fantasy movie. But spoiler alert, it is not. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot into it. And if not that, then a dead pig is likely decomposing in it. Parasites, bacteria, and the whole microbial army of medieval Europe are waiting in every sip. That is why people drank beer. Yes, beer, even children. But before you imagine medieval kids doing keg stands, remember that it was small beer, weak in alcohol, strong in survival. Brewing boiled the water, so it was safer than anything that flowed through the city ditch. Wine was another option if you were rich enough to afford it, and unconcerned with functioning properly before noon. What about bathing? Surely water was used for cleansing. In principle, yes. In practice, certainly no. See, back then, people believed bathing actually opened your pores and let the disease in. That is right. Washing yourself was considered medically dangerous. You were cleaner, seemingly, if you never removed the protective layer of dirt caked onto your skin. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly gained reputations as places for gossip, scandal, and sometimes full-on medieval extracurriculars. So obviously, the church got worried and shut many down. Even if you did want to wash, it was a full production. You would need to fetch water from the well, boil it over a fire, fill a wooden tub that leaked, and then pray no one else in the house used it before you, or worse, after. And rainwater collected in open barrels where birds poop, insects breed, and moss thrives. Sounds refreshing, does not it? So whether it is stepping into your mouth, on your body, or onto your crops, water in the Middle Ages is less of a life source and more of a gamble. One wrong gulp and you are spending your final days sweating in a straw bed, clutching your stomach, and contemplating all your life decisions. Next time you sip tap water, raise a glass for our ancestors. They did not have the luxury of hydration without risk. So you drank the water. Or maybe you did not. Perhaps you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like sadness. Either way, you are sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is really just polite torture with a theology degree. Let's start with the analysis. Everything wrong with you, whether it is a cough, rash, broken bone, or the creeping plague, is caused by your humors being out of balance. The four humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to medieval science, your health depends on retaining them balanced like some kind of internal soup. Got a fever? Too much blood? The answer: bloodletting. That is right. Let's drain your life force right into a bowl using a dull blade or a hungry leech. And yes, barbers were often the ones doing it. Imagine getting a haircut and a hemoglobin extraction in one sitting, 2 for 1 baby. Feeling sad or worrying? This is clearly an excess of black bile. The cure: laxatives, maybe a warm herbal purge, or just prayers and a cold compress while everyone avoids eye contact with you and starts carving your coffin. Now, if you break a bone or get an unpleasant wound, you are in real trouble. There is no anesthesia, unless you consider passing out from pain. Surgery is carried out with knives that have not been cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are heated over fire, not for sterilization, but because they just look scarier that way. Antibiotics, centuries away. Germ theory, not invented yet. They think disease comes from bad air, or God being angry with your moral failings. Got a stomach ache? Must have been your sinful thoughts. Wish you like confessing while vomiting. If your condition gets worse, you will be treated with more leeches, likely some crushed beetles, and a priest at your bedside giving last rites, just in case. At this point, they are preparing for the cure called death. And if by some miracle you get better, everyone just assumes God took pity on you. The physician takes full credit, and the leech gets promoted. So yes, in the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure. After an extended day of exertions, lice and leeches, it is finally time to eat. You shuffle back to your hovel, stomach growling, ready for the only joy left in life, a warm meal. Bad news, your meal might be trying to kill you. Let's start with the basics. Food preservation does not really exist. There is no fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or the hope that winter air keeps things fresh. Your meat, if you are lucky enough to have any, has been hanging for days, covered in flies, marinated in questionable brine, and likely shared with a rat or two. Bread is the cornerstone of the medieval diet, but even that is not safe. In bad harvest years, determined peasants bulk it up with bark, sawdust, or even clay to make it stretch. And if it is rice season, there is a bonus: ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It is like ingesting bread laced with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables, only if they are in season. And you know what is always in season. Turnips. So many turnips. Boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage, which, if you recall from Chapter 3, is essentially a warm swamp of mystery components that has been simmering since your great-grandfather's funeral. Fruit is probably available in the fall, but it rots quickly, and sugar is rare, costly, and hoarded by the rich to show off their blackened teeth. Dairy is another gamble. Fresh milk spoils in hours. Butter and cheese fare better, but they are loaded with bacteria. People eat them anyway because, frankly, it is either that or chew your boot leather. And let's talk about seasoning. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg are worth more than gold. For the average peasant, flavor comes from onions, salt, if you are lucky, and pain. Most food tastes like damp burlap sprinkled with sadness. But food is not just a health hazard, it is a political one. Game animals belong to the Lord, not you. Caught poaching a rabbit, you could be fined, imprisoned, or even executed. That is right. Your dinner could get you hanged. So as you sit down to eat your gray stew by flickering firelight, remember every chew is a chance, but you eat anyway, because in the Middle Ages, Food does not nourish. It tests you. It is night now. You have worked, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You may think the day is winding down, but do not get too comfortable because God is watching. So is the priest, and so is your neighbor Agnes, who will certainly rat you out if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, faith is not just a part of existence, it is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your education if you can read, your birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think about it as your spiritual landlord, and you are constantly behind on rent. Every day is structured around prayer bells. The city church bell rings in the morning, noon, and night, not because people need reminders, but because missing prayer is a sin. Forget to bow. A sin. Eat meat on a Friday. A sin. Reflect on your neighbor's spouse in that one dream. Double sin. And yes, hell is very real, vividly real. Monks describe it in exquisite detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks and eternal wailing. If the plague does not scare you, endless damnation absolutely will. You cannot read the Bible yourself because it is written in Latin, a language reserved for monks, clergy, and that one noble child who is too good for dirt. You depend upon the church to interpret everything for you, meaning if the priest says your crop failure is because you failed to pray hard enough, well, time to kneel harder. Tithes, a tenth of everything you own, are mandatory. If you grow wheat, you give wheat. If you raise chickens, you give eggs. If you have nothing, congratulations, you are spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. Holidays. They are holy days, dozens of them. And while they offer breaks from labor, they are not for fun, but for attending Mass, fasting, confessing sins, and reminding yourself that joy is a risky indulgence. Questioning the church is dangerous. Heretics are burned, witches are drowned, blasphemers are flogged, and skeptics are fast reformed. So you go through the motions. You chant. You bow. You pray that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered life, might finally land in paradise, assuming the priest likes you, because in the Middle Ages God may be merciful, but the church not so much. If you thought being a medieval peasant was hard, try doing it as a woman. All the grime, famine, and worry, plus childbirth, subservience, and social invisibility. In the Middle Ages, being a female is like being on hard mode with no health potions and no restart button. From birth, a woman's life path is pretty much locked in. Marry young, bear children, serve your husband, die worn out. Education. Not likely, unless you are from a noble family and sent to a convent. Your intellectual development stops around the time you learn how to churn butter and patch a tunic. Marriage happens early, absolutely early. It is not weird to be betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14. It is not about love. It is about land, cattle, and alliances. Your opinion. Not required. Once married, you are basically your husband's property. Your job is to provide heirs, feed everyone, keep the house running, and not complain, because complaining would get you branded a nag or, worse, a witch. That label comes with a complimentary drowning or burning, depending on local fashion. Childbirth is a death lottery. There is no prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. Midwives do their best, but even minor complications can mean death for the mother, the child, or both. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many do not survive 2. But do not worry, once the baby is out, your work increases. Now you have a screaming toddler in a lice-ridden hut, and you are expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still help in the fields. You do not get a break. You are the break for everyone else. If you are single, you are suspicious. If you are widowed, vulnerable. If you are outspoken, dangerous. Women who did not conform were frequently accused of witchcraft, especially if they had herbal knowledge, a strong personality, or just looked at someone funny on a wet Tuesday. Even in the church, your position is limited. Nuns lived under strict rules. No speaking without permission, no freedom of movement, and your spiritual worth always ranked beneath men. In short, if you are a female in the Middle Ages, you are expected to bear, obey, reproduce, and suffer in silence, ideally while smiling, because even in a time of general suffering, women were somehow expected to suffer gracefully. To this point, you have battled dirt, hunger, social injustice, and possibly a goat. But just when you think your day cannot get any worse, here comes violence. Loud, bloody, and often absolutely acceptable by medieval standards. Let's be clear, the Middle Ages were not peaceful. The idea of law and order usually meant, hope the local lord is not in a bad mood. Violence is everywhere. In the home, in the streets, on the battlefield, in church disputes, and sometimes in line at the communal bread oven. Crime is commonplace, punishment is brutal, and justice is more performance art than protection. Steal a loaf of bread. You could lose a hand. Accused of lying. Your tongue might get pierced. Gossip too much. Meet the scold's bridle, a steel mask strapped to your head with a bar in your mouth, for correction, of course. Let's say you are accused of something serious, heresy, robbery, witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence? By being tortured, obviously. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One model. You stick your hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals without infection in 3 days, you are innocent. If not, you are guilty. Another option, you are tossed into a river. If you sink, you are innocent and probably dead. If you float, you are guilty and may be punished anyway. It is like a medieval game show where the prize is survival, and the host is actively rooting against you. And if you are sentenced to death, that is a public event. Executions are performed in front of cheering crowds. Hangings, beheadings, burnings. Sometimes people bring snacks. It is the medieval equivalent of cable TV. Domestic violence. Absolutely ordinary. Husbands were allowed, even expected, to discipline their wives and children. Street fights. Commonplace. You may be crushed, just for looking the wrong way at a noble's horse. And warfare, constantly simmering. Local feuds, territorial disputes, religious crusades. Someone is always marching off to stab someone else in the name of honor, God, or boredom. Violence is not a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It is society. Everyone lives with the constant knowledge that life is fragile, justice is bigoted, and your neighbor may bash your head in over a pig. So walk carefully, keep your eyes down, and never trust anyone with a club. At this point, you have made it through the lice, the leeches, the laundry-less misery, and the looming risk of public disembowelment. But now comes the final chapter of most medieval lives, an early and unglamorous death. If you are alive and still breathing past the age of 40, you are almost a celebrity. You might even be called the Old One, which is less of a nickname and more of a statistical miracle. Let's break it down. The average life expectancy hovers around 30–40 years, but that number is dragged down heavily by infant mortality. Almost half of all children died before reaching age 5. Disease, malnutrition, or one bad winter was all it took. No vaccine, no antibiotics, no choice. If you survived early childhood, you entered adulthood already exhausted. Work began as soon as you could walk upright, and by 25, your joints creaked like a monastery door. You might be missing several teeth, a finger, and most of your original optimism. Women faced a specifically fatal gauntlet, childbirth. It became one of the main causes of death for medieval ladies. No pain relief, no medical intervention, just prayer, warm water, and someone holding your hand while you bled out on a straw-filled cot. For men, the dangers were different but equally relentless. Farming injuries, infections from minor wounds, a neighbor's drunken rage, a crusade gone sideways. Even walking to the market could be risky if you crossed paths with a bored bandit or an angry tax collector. Death may also come quietly from the plague, which turned towns into cemeteries overnight, or from famine that could last complete seasons, scaling down entire villages. Or from bad luck, like eating spoiled grain and spending your final hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls. And funerals. You were fortunate if you got one. Bodies were often buried quickly to avoid disease. No embalming, no polished coffins, just a hole, a few murmured prayers, and a shallow mound of earth if there was enough space left in the churchyard. So yes, in medieval instances, life was brutal, brief, and constantly under siege by death in all its casual forms. You did not retire, you just stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's move on to your final chapter. The medieval dream dies. So how has your day been? You have woken up in dirt, relieved yourself right into a bucket, brushed your teeth with wishful thinking, almost passed out from starvation, worked until your backbone cried for mercy, scratched your way through itchy wool, prayed to not get plague, and slightly dodged a public execution for owning a squirrel. Welcome to a single day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of turning into a knight? Think again. That romanticized model of the Middle Ages, gallant swordsmen, noble ladies in towers, heroic battles and feasts in candlelight grand halls. It is a fantasy polished by fairy stories and fantasy books. In reality, the medieval world was gritty, merciless, and deeply unfair. Hierarchy was everything. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born wealthy, congratulations. You had a higher risk of surviving, but you were still one awful soup far from dysentery and a hasty burial. Even the nobles were not immune to distress. Castles were drafty stone refrigerators filled with fleas, smoke, and politically motivated marriages. Sure, you had a fur cloak and a goblet of wine, but also a 50% chance of death in a skirmish or from an infected splinter. Not exactly luxury. The easier times were not simple, they were relentless. Everything took longer, everything hurt more. Everything from childbirth to chewing came with consequences. Life became survival, not amusement. And if you did discover a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine something better, there was not much you could do with it. No upward mobility, no modern medicine, no internet to Google. What is this weird rash? You lived, suffered, labored, and died within a 10-mile radius of where you had been born. But here is the wildest part. Through all of this, people still laughed, sang songs, told stories, fell in love, and found meaning. Not because life was easy, but because people are stubborn like that. Even in the darkest chapters, they made space for light. So tonight, when you slip into your soft bed with indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, maybe say a quiet thank you to the current world, and for your ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudalism, so that you would not have to. Long before she was Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, mistress of reform and icon of ambition, she was simply Sophie. Born Sophie Frederica Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she was the daughter of a relatively obscure German princely family. Her tiny duchy in Pomerania provided little in terms of power, but Sophie herself, she had something no title could provide: razor-sharp intelligence, relentless charm, and a quiet, burning hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was strict. Her mother, Johanna, was cold and calculating. Not a warm, nurturing figure, but a social climber enthusiastic about status. Sophie's father, a Prussian officer, was more remote than disciplinary. From a young age, Sophie learned to walk the fine line between obedience and cunning. She read voraciously, spoke multiple languages, and learned how to read a room before speaking in it, skills that might soon become survival gear in one of Europe's most brutal courts. When the Russian Empress Elizabeth Petrovna commenced looking for a wife for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russia's borders. Peter himself was of German descent, and Empress Elizabeth believed a foreign bride, pliable and thankful, might be easier to manipulate. Sophie fit the bill perfectly. Noble blood, Lutheran faith, which she would be forced to abandon, and a reputation for both grace and humility. At just 14 years old, Sophie was summoned to Russia. She arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, wearing thin German cloth and a diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a chess piece. Sophie, however, had her own game in mind. To emerge as perfect in Russian society, she converted to Orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna Catherine. The ceremony was public, symbolic, and life-altering. She was not just changing religions. She was burning the bridge behind her, entering a foreign empire without a way back. No one looking at that quiet teenage girl in a fur-trimmed coat could have expected what might come next. Betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. But from the moment Sophie stepped foot in the Russian court, she stopped being a pawn and started planning how to become a queen. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was supposed to secure her place in Russian royalty. But from the very beginning, it felt more like a cage than a crown. Peter, heir to the Russian throne, was not the dashing prince of fairy stories. Awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers, he was far more interested in playing war games in his chambers than governing an empire or displaying affection to his new wife. Some accounts even suggest he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and resented the Russian court that had adopted him. In comparison, Catherine embraced Russia with a fierce commitment. She learned the language, studied its history, and memorized Orthodox rituals. She desired to belong. Peter wanted to escape. This mismatch was not just emotional, it was political. The Russian court turned into a viper's nest of gossip, paranoia, and brutal power games. Empress Elizabeth still ruled with absolute authority, but her health was in decline. Everyone knew a transition was coming, and everyone had an agenda. Catherine was watched continuously. Her letters were read, her friendships monitored, and her every move scrutinized. She could not accept as true with her husband, her mother, who was still whispering in her ear on behalf of foreign interests, or even her servants. In this world, alliances could turn into accusations overnight. But Catherine was no fool. She learned to play the court's games, quietly cultivating allies in the shadows. She charmed military officers, made friends with students, and evolved a reputation for dignity and reticence, a stark contrast to her husband's infantile tantrums and open contempt for Russian traditions. Behind closed doors, Catherine started reading Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others saw her as a young consort, she was building a vision not just for herself but for Russia, a state of power, education, and reason. But there was one problem. The longer Peter lived, the longer Catherine remained in limbo, a powerless wife to a man undeserving to rule. So she waited, learned, and planned. She knew the Russian throne would not be inherited. It would have to be taken. In 1762, after almost 2 decades of waiting, watching, and quietly maneuvering, Catherine saw her moment and seized it with breathtaking precision. Empress Elizabeth had died, and Peter, now Peter III, was finally Tsar. But his reign began unraveling almost immediately. In only a few short months, Peter alienated the church, angered the nobility, insulted the army, and lavished praise on Prussia, Russia's longtime enemy. He reversed key policies, humiliated the clergy, and talked openly about divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court, already wary of his erratic behavior, grew cold. The army, filled with generals loyal to Catherine, grumbled in corridors. Even ordinary Russians, devout and patriotic, noticed Peter as a foreign puppet who mocked their traditions. Catherine, watching all of this spread, made her move. In July of that same year, while Peter was away at his summer palace, Catherine launched a bloodless coup d'état. Supported by key military officials, including her lover Gregory Orlov and his influential brothers, she rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia, was proclaimed Empress Catherine II, and won the allegiance of the powerful imperial guard. Peter, caught off guard and without allies, surrendered within days. He was taken into custody, and soon after discovered dead under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was reported as a hemorrhoidal colic. Unofficially, it was murder. Catherine was now empress, not by birth, not by marriage, but by will, wit, and audacity. It was remarkable. A foreign-born woman without a legitimate claim had taken the Russian throne without a single battle. But her actual challenge was just starting. She had to transform that ambitious seizure of power into an enduring legacy. Could Russia accept her? Would the nobility recognize her? Could she hold the empire together without falling victim to the same fate as her husband? Catherine understood that power gained through intrigue could be lost just as easily. She had to rule not as a schemer, but as a visionary. And so began her transformation from a careful conspirator to a reforming empress, one who would redraw borders, embody the Enlightenment, and redefine what it meant to be a woman in power. Once Catherine had the crown, she could have rested on her power, but she did not. She had something bigger in mind than just sitting on a throne. She wanted to transform Russia, and not just militarily or politically, but intellectually. While Peter had worshipped Frederick the Great and toy soldiers, Catherine idolized Voltaire, Diderot, and the ambitious thinkers of the Enlightenment. She believed in reason, progress, education, and the role of a monarch as a servant of the people, even though she herself ruled with absolute authority. Catherine did not just study Enlightenment philosophy, she lived it. She corresponded directly with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him while shielding her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court, and even bought his entire library to support him financially. Behind closed doors, she pored over legal texts, debated reforms, and crafted policies to modernize the empire. Her early reign became filled with efforts to codify Russian law. She formed the Legislative Commission in 1767, an ambitious project meant to rewrite the entire criminal code of Russia. Catherine's own nakaz, or instruction, was a political manifesto in disguise, one that referred to equality before the law, the dangers of torture, and the duty of rulers to serve the common good. For an empress in 18th century Russia, it turned into radical. But Enlightenment beliefs had to survive the realities of Russia, a sizable, feudal, deeply conservative land ruled by nobles who liked their serfs exactly where they were, beneath them. Catherine knew this. While she encouraged reform, she moved cautiously. She abolished some types of torture, improved access to secular education, and built schools and libraries. But she also reaffirmed the nobility's control over their serfs to maintain them loyal. This was Catherine's balancing act, a philosopher queen in public, a practical empress in private. She walked a tightrope between ideology and survival, between the shining salons of Paris and the gritty politics of Moscow. Her vision for Russia was bold, but constantly calculated. In many ways, Catherine was not looking to make Russia European. She was seeking to make Russia modern on her terms. And that meant reform, yes, but with an iron hand in a velvet glove. Catherine was not content with reforming Russia from within. She desired to expand it outward, to make it an empire worthy of fear, admiration, and envy. Where Peter the Great had opened a window to the west, Catherine aimed to knock down the walls. Under her leadership, Russia's borders stretched wider than ever before. She waged wars not just to protect her crown, but to reshape the map of Europe. One of her maximum significant campaigns was against the Ottoman Empire. These wars, fought in waves throughout the 1760s and 1770s, were not just about territory, they were about influence. Catherine saw herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians living beneath Muslim rule, and as the rightful protector of Eastern Europe. Under generals like Alexander Suvorov and Gregory Potemkin, Russia captured key regions, including Crimea, the northern coast of the Black Sea, and access to warm water ports, something Russian czars had coveted for generations. These victories were not just military, they were symbolic. With every conquest, Catherine sent a message. Russia was no longer the remote, backward cousin of Europe. It became a continental force. She also turned her gaze westward. In a series of deals and diplomatic maneuvers, Catherine participated in the partitions of Poland, carving up the struggling Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth alongside Austria and Prussia. By the end of the Third Partition in 1795, Poland was erased from the map, and Russia claimed significant new lands and millions of new subjects. But Catherine did not just conquer with armies, she also colonized with ideas. New cities were built, trade routes were improved, and German settlers were invited to cultivate Russian farmland. The empire became a mosaic, from the icy Baltic to the sun-drenched beaches of the Black Sea. And through all of it, Catherine remained the central force, reading reports, issuing orders, and personally overseeing the shape of her expanding empire. Critics would accuse her of being power-hungry, even imperialistic, but to Catherine, enlargement was not ambition, it was destiny. A great ruler, she believed, was measured not just by ideas but by borders. She did not just want to rule Russia. She wanted to remake it as a civilized empire, feared by its enemies, respected by its peers, and loyal to her alone. For all her brilliance and power, Catherine the Great was just as famous for what went on behind palace doors. And no, not all of it was whispered in libraries. Catherine's private existence was one of the most discussed components of her reign. She had lovers, not just one or two, but a carefully curated parade of them, many decades younger, often handsome, and sometimes politically influential. She did not hide them. In fact, she often rewarded them with titles, estates, and pensions if they behaved well. If not, they were quietly dismissed, sometimes with a polite thank you and a generous retirement. Among the maximum vital of these lovers was Gregory Potemkin, a man as great as he was ambitious. Their relationship blurred the lines between romance, politics, and partnership. Some historians believe they may have even married in secret. Together, they formed military campaigns, colonization initiatives, and the transformation of southern Russia. Potemkin was not just a lover, he was her co-ruler in many ways. Still, Europe could not look past the scandal. Gossip swirled. Satirical pamphlets painted her as lustful, insatiable, even unhinged. And after her death, the rumors only got worse, the most infamous being the absolutely false and grotesque story regarding a horse, spread by her enemies to smear her legacy. But why the obsession? Simple. Catherine was a woman who wielded power unapologetically. And in a global where female rulers were expected to be either saintly virgins or tragic figures, she refused to play the role. She lived, loved, and ruled on her very own terms, and that made her dangerous. Ironically, while her critics painted her as immoral, Catherine herself was deeply philosophical about love and sexuality. She believed pleasure was a natural part of existence, and that personal relationships did not have to threaten public duty. She separated emotion from governance, a feat few male rulers managed. In fact, her liaisons were frequently strategic. She surrounded herself with men who were loyal, capable, and politically beneficial. And when they ceased to be, she let them go, usually with a smile and a generous retirement. Catherine's love life did not weaken her rule. It became a part of her strategy, a blend of passion and power that made her unforgettable, envied, and feared. For all her aura and control, Catherine's reign was not without peril. And in 1773, that peril came in the shape of a bearded Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev. He was no regular rebel. Pugachev claimed to be none other than Peter III, Catherine's dead husband. According to him, he had survived the coup and now returned to reclaim the throne from the German usurper. It was absurd. Peter was long gone. But to Russia's oppressed and exhausted lower classes, the claim did not need to be true. It just had to offer hope. Pugachev promised liberation, an end to serfdom, lower taxes, and land for the common people. His words lit a fire across the Volga River region, specifically among Cossacks, peasants, and old believers. In a time when the distance between nobles and serfs had widened brutally, his promises sounded like salvation. The Pugachev Rebellion became the largest peasant rebellion in Russian history. Towns were taken, fortresses fell, and nobles were slaughtered. For a terrifying moment, it seemed as if the empire itself might fracture. Catherine was shaken. This was not a foreign war she could win with cavalry and treaties. This became a rebellion from within, her own people rising against the system she ruled. But Catherine did not panic, she acted. She dispatched professional military forces to overwhelm the uprising ruthlessly. Pugachev's forces were defeated in 1774. He was captured, displayed in an iron cage, and eventually beheaded in Moscow, a public warning to all who dared follow. Afterward, Catherine doubled down on order and control. Her dreams of liberating the serfs quietly diminished into silence. The revolt had shown her the limits of enlightenment in a country still shackled by feudalism. She now leaned harder on the nobility, who offered loyalty in exchange for absolute control over their serfs. This became a turning point. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now prioritized stability over philosophy. Reform became cautious. Surveillance increased. Rebellion, even whispered, was to be stomped out before it had breath. Pugachev may have lost his head, but he left behind a warning that haunted Catherine. That power built on inequality could only sustain itself so long before the storm came crashing through. By the time Catherine the Great approached the final years of her life, she had ruled Russia for over 3 decades, longer than any woman ruler in Russian history. From the moment she seized power, she had defied expectations, reshaped her empire, and redefined what a woman and a monarch could be. Under Catherine's reign, Russia became a true European powerhouse. Its territory extended by over 200,000 square miles, swallowing Crimea, parts of Poland, and stretches of the Black coastline. These were not just military wins. They were strategic pivots, securing warm water ports and reshaping trade. But her legacy was not only drawn on maps. Catherine left a cultural mark as well. She helped found the Hermitage Museum, amassed one of the greatest art collections in Europe, and corresponded with the greatest minds of the Enlightenment. Her court became a center of class, art, and intellectual ambition. In a country often viewed as backward by Western Europeans, Catherine put Russia firmly on the cultural map. She modernized education, founding schools for women and promoting the printing of books. She introduced smallpox inoculation to Russia, even publicly receiving the vaccine herself, an act of medical bravery in her time. But her reign was also one of contradictions. While she embraced Enlightenment ideals, she never freed the serfs. In fact, she extended serfdom deeper into Russia's territories. Her reforms, while impressive, remained mostly top-down, designed to polish the empire without actually transforming its foundations. Still, Catherine's rule delivered stability and ambition. She understood that power was not inherited. It became crafted, controlled, and constantly defended. She dominated not by divine right but by force of will, political brilliance, and relentless calculation. She was called many things: a usurper, a tyrant, a reformer, a seductress. But most significantly, she was powerful. When she died in 1796, Russia became wealthier, larger, and more ambitious than it had been in centuries. She left behind a throne secure, an empire expanded, and a legend that could endure for centuries. Catherine did not just reign. She dominated with intellect, strategy, and an unapologetic grip on history. And in doing so, she became more than an empress. She became a legend. For all her power, expansion, and enduring legacy, Catherine the Great was still, at her core, a woman navigating a man's world and reshaping it in her image. Behind the imperial portraits and state decrees was a person deeply aware of how precarious her role was. She was not born Russian. She came to the throne through a coup. She ruled an empire that did not want a female in charge. And yet she not only endured, she thrived. Catherine was never content to be decorative. She read continuously, wrote constantly, and never stopped learning. Her daily schedule was intense. Hours of reading reports, corresponding with foreign powers, editing state papers, and managing a court packed with rival factions. She was not content to simply sit on the throne. She worked the throne like a stateswoman born to it. She was also, in many ways, lonely. She surrounded herself with courtiers, lovers, and artists, yet wrote in her memoirs of how few people she could truly trust. Her son Paul, whom she distrusted and kept away from state matters, grew into a man she feared could undo all her progress. Her greatest emotional partnership with Gregory Potemkin faded into deep friendship, but his death in 1791 left a wound that never truly healed. Catherine crafted her image carefully. She understood the power of narrative and wielded it better than most monarchs of her age. She posed as Mother of Russia, enlightened monarch, warrior empress, and lover of the arts. But beneath those roles was a lady who had endured rejection, betrayal, scandal, and rebellion, and kept going. When she died in 1796, she left behind an empire transformed, but also questions. Should she have done more to end serfdom? Were her Enlightenment ideals compromised by politics? Was she more reformer or ruler? History remembers her by the title she never gave herself, the Great. It was not because she was great or kind or just. It was because she took power and wielded it on her own terms in a time and place where women were not supposed to have any. She did not just wear the crown, she rewrote what it meant to deserve one. In the humid depths of the Chiapas jungle in southern Mexico, the ruins of Palenque whisper stories from the ancient Maya world. Towering temples rise above the canopy, their limestone faces eroded by time but still brimming with secrets. And in 1994, one of these secrets revealed itself. A team of Mexican archaeologists led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez was surveying Temple 3, a relatively modest pyramid next to the more famous Temple of the Inscriptions, the burial site of the strong king Pakal the Great. Temple 3 was not expected to hold much until they noticed something unusual, a sealed, hidden chamber under the structure. No looters had touched it. It was pristine. When the archaeologists broke through and lowered themselves inside, they found a stone sarcophagus resting in silence. The air was heavy with the weight of centuries. As they opened the lid, red dust rose like smoke, great, shocking red. The interior was covered in powdered cinnabar, a poisonous mercury sulfide used ceremonially by the Maya. And lying inside that red cloud was the skeleton of a woman. She had been buried with care and reverence. Her bones were fragile but intact, her skull still wearing a jade mask, and her body surrounded by funerary offerings. Necklaces, diadems, ear spools, all made from jade and shell. Everything about the burial screamed royalty, but no name was inscribed. No glyphs identified her. It became one of the richest female burials ever determined in Mesoamerica, and yet it was a complete enigma. Why was she buried in red powder? Who was she? Was she a queen, a priestess, or possibly even Pakal's wife? The researchers called her the Red Queen, and the name stuck. But in spite of modern forensics, they could not say for sure who she was, only that she had lived around the 7th century, during the golden age of Palenque. Unlike most Maya tombs, hers had been hidden, untouched, and purposefully isolated. Her burial was not just ceremonial, it was spiritual. This female was not intended to be remembered with words. She was intended to be remembered via ritual, via color, and through the mystery she left behind. The maximum haunting characteristic of the Red Queen's tomb was not her jade jewelry or the silence of the sealed chamber. It was the red dust. A thick layer of powdered cinnabar covered everything. The sarcophagus, the walls, her bones, even the offerings around her. It clung like blood to stone. To the Maya, this was no coincidence. Cinnabar, made from crushed mercury sulfide, was one of the most sacred and dangerous substances inside the ancient world. Its vibrant red shade was not just visually striking. It symbolized blood, rebirth, and the life force that linked the human and divine realms. Red became sacred. It was the color of dawn, of sacrifice, of life rising from death. And it was not just symbolic, it was religious. Protecting the dead in cinnabar became a ritual meant to transform the body, preserving it not for eternity but for transition. In Maya belief, death was not the end. It became a passage, a crossing into another cosmic layer. And so the Red Queen, whoever she was being prepared not only for burial but for deification. But there is another layer to this. Cinnabar is poisonous. Repeated exposure can result in mercury poisoning, tremors, hallucinations, even death. The Maya probably did not recognize the chemistry, but they felt its efficiency. It was dangerous, effective, risky. To wash the corpse in it was to declare this person was no ordinary mortal. In Palenque, only a few had been buried with cinnabar. Pakal the Great, The strong king whose pyramid dominates the site became one. His body, like hers, was also saturated in the red powder. That detail alone drew speculation. Was the Red Queen his spouse, his mother, or someone of equal divine status? Her skull had been placed on a layer of jaguar skin, another sacred symbol. Around her, bone needles, obsidian blades, and miniature jade statuettes hinted at rituals completed either during her life or in her honor at death. Every part of her burial told a story without words, a tale of power cloaked in secrecy, a woman prepared to move into the underworld not in silence but in ceremony, drenched in the shade of sacrifice. Surrounding the Red Queen's red-drenched remains was a world of silence, broken only by the gleam of jade, shell, and obsidian. These were not mere embellishments. They were offerings, each one carefully chosen to accompany her on the journey to the Maya afterlife, the Xibalba. At her sides were jade necklaces, heavy and cold, their polished surfaces still radiant after 1,300 years underground. Jade was not just beautiful, it was sacred. The Maya considered it a symbol of eternal life. It represented the green of maize, the power of the jungle, and the breath of the gods. Only the elite were buried with jade. For the Red Queen, it covered her chest, wrists, and ears, a clean signal that in life she wielded influence, perhaps even divine favor. One of the most haunting items was the jade funerary mask, placed delicately over her face. Unlike the golden death mask of Egypt, this one was subtle, comprised of dozens of tiny mosaic tiles arranged to mimic the contours of her skull. The mask served a ritual feature, to protect the soul, to maintain identity, and to present her as divine in the eyes of the gods. Scattered near her bones were bone needles, obsidian blades, and shell artifacts. These might have been tools of ritual or symbols of her status as priestess, healer, or royal matriarch. One bone pin was engraved, faint but functional, a small echo of her voice lost to time. At her feet and along the edges of the tomb were ceramic vessels, still sealed, possibly once packed with offerings, food, drink, or incense to sustain her spirit beyond death. The Maya believed the afterlife was a journey, risky, layered, packed with challenges. These objects were not luxuries, they were necessities. The modesty of the tomb feels intimate, not overloaded but intentional. There was no gold, no chariots, no pomp, just objects chosen with spiritual weight. It turned into a map for the soul. Through these treasures, we glimpse how the Maya understood death, not as finality but as a transition of power. The Red Queen was not buried to be forgotten. She was being prepared to ascend. For all the grandeur of her tomb, the Red Queen left behind one haunting void. No name, no inscriptions adorned her sarcophagus. No glyphs on the walls recognized her. She was definitely someone powerful, but who? From the moment her tomb became opened, scholars started trying to connect the dots. The most compelling idea is that the Red Queen was Ixtziakbu Adjo, the wife of Ka-Inish Janab Pakal, known today as Pakal the Great, the most famous ruler of Palenque. Ixtezcatl became more than just Pacal's consort. She was born into the nobility and married into Palenque's royal dynasty at a young age. She bore at least 3 sons, all of whom held high status, and she performed a key ceremonial role during her husband's reign. If anyone could be buried with such honor, it was her. Supporting this theory was the tomb's location, only a few feet away from Pacal's own grand burial in the Temple of the Inscriptions. The proximity shows a deliberate pairing, husband and wife rulers even in death. And then there is the cinnabar. Only 2 burials in Palenque were determined with such intense cinnabar coverage, Pacal and the Red Queen. It is not likely this was accident. But here is where the mystery deepens. DNA tests were carried out on both sets of remains in hopes of confirming the connection, but the results were inconclusive. The female's bones showed no direct maternal link to Pacal, but that did not rule out a spousal relationship. After all, marriage does not require shared blood. Some have argued she might have been Inish Janab Pacal's effective mother, who ruled Palenque before he came of age. Others suggest she may have been a high priestess, or a sister, or a royal ancestor whose name has simply been lost to history's erosion. Still, the evidence points most strongly to Ixtezcatl, a queen by title, a mother of kings, and a spiritual counterpart to Pacal. The shortage of a name may not be an oversight. It may have been intentional. In Maya cosmology, the soul lived on not through monuments but through ritual, symbol, and the whispers of the earth. And so the Red Queen remains suspended between legend and reality, a woman who dominated, remembered not in stone but in scarlet and silence. To recognize the Red Queen, we must recognize the world she came from, a global in which Maya women, especially royal ones, held more influence than many realize. In Maya civilization, politics was often a family affair. Royal ladies were not merely passive consorts. They were diplomats, priestesses, and power agents. They carried out rituals, sponsored temples, and played vital roles in maintaining dynastic legitimacy. Their bloodlines were political capital, used to forge alliances and secure claims to the throne. Take Saqqayuk, for instance, the mother of Pacal the Great. When the throne of Palenque became left vacant, she took power herself and ruled as queen regent until her son came of age. She was not a placeholder. She was a ruler in her very own right, issuing decrees and overseeing construction projects. Without her, Pacal may also never have risen at all. And she was not an anomaly. Throughout the Maya world, in places like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, inscriptions display women performing primary ceremonies, conducting war, diplomacy, and sometimes ruling outright. They were often portrayed in stelae and murals, dressed in intricate headdresses and regalia, standing beside kings as equals or sometimes above them. Their words had been carved in glyphs. Their names were remembered until they were not. By the time Spanish conquistadors arrived centuries later, much of that memory had eroded. The colonial lens noticed Native women as silent figures in a male-dominated world, but the archaeology tells a different story, one of complex gender roles where power became negotiated, not simply inherited. This context casts the Red Queen in a new light. She might not have dominated in name, but her burial, rich, sacred, and placed beside Pakal, shows she was a central pillar in the royal order. Her jade mask was not just decoration. It became a symbol of identity, of power held in life and guarded in death. Her bloodline may have been the very glue that held Palunk's dynasty together. In Maya civilization, a queen was not just a queen. She was a keeper of sacred lineage, a voice in ceremony, and often the bridge between gods and men. The Red Queen may be anonymous, but in her world she was never voiceless. The Red Queen was not just buried with treasures. She was buried in structure rich with purpose, layered with Maya cosmology, ritual symbolism, and intentional design. Her tomb was not merely a grave. It became a gateway to eternity. Her frame was located inside Temple 3, one of the smaller pyramids inside the heart of Palenque, but its proximity to the Temple of the Inscriptions, the resting region of Pakal the Great, is telling. These temples were not constructed randomly. Their positioning was sacred, guided by astrology, myth, and dynastic legacy. Temple 3 rises modestly compared to its grand neighbor, but it hides something even more intimate. A sealed crypt, untouched by looters, flawlessly preserved. It became built deep inside the temple's core, accessible only by a steep, narrow staircase. The descent into her tomb feels almost symbolic, a ritual adventure downward into the underworld. The chamber itself is stark, made of cut stone, sealed tightly for over 1,300 years. No glyphs or murals cover the walls. No ornate carvings inform her story. But perhaps that silence is intentional. This became a place not for the living to interpret, but for the dead to transform. At the center, her sarcophagus sits like an altar made of limestone. It echoes the grand stone coffin of Pakal next door. While Pakal's lid is famously engraved with scenes of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's tomb is more subdued. The focal point is inward, at the body, at the cinnabar, at the ritual of death itself. And yet there are subtle architectural cues that trace at meaning. The tomb is aligned east to west, a symbolic path mirroring the sun's journey from life to death. The chamber is small but powerful. It feels planned, personal, a sacred enclosure for someone revered. Maya temples were cosmological tools, bridges between the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. To be buried in one turned into, to be expanded beyond the human realm. The Red Queen's everlasting home was not an afterthought. It became a carefully constructed shrine, a place wherein death became transformation. Her bones rest in stone, her essence in cinnabar, and her legacy inside the structure itself. A temple that speaks without words, telling us she mattered. To the ancient Maya, death was not the end. It became a threshold, a sacred passage into the underworld called Xibalba. And for someone like the Red Queen, This crossing was not only religious, it was political, cosmological, and deeply ritualized. Burial rituals were carefully choreographed activities rooted in myth and supposed to guide the soul through the treacherous layers of the underworld. Maya texts and iconography tell us that Xibalba was no peaceful afterlife. It became a maze of darkness, rivers of blood, trials, and gods of death. Only those well buried, ritually organized, and spiritually prepared could make the adventure successfully. The Red Queen turned into buried wrapped in cinnabar, encased in stone, and surrounded by offerings, all signs of an elite burial. But there is more. The presence of bone needles and obsidian blades in her tomb trace at auto-sacrifice rituals, probably symbolic equipment representing rites she had achieved in life, or that had been reenacted at her burial to empower her spirit. Her funerary mask, carefully assembled from jade tiles, was not truly ornamental. It may have served as a spiritual vessel, keeping her face and identity as she journeyed into the afterlife. In Maya belief, the face became a mirror of the soul, and the soul had to be recognized by the gods. The ceramic vessels surrounding her can also have once held chocolate, maize water, or maybe pulque to nourish her in the next global. Other items like stingray spines or shell trumpets could have represented spiritual equipment, calls to the gods, or tokens of ritual communication. Burial was not just a goodbye, it was a transformation. The Maya believed in cycles, death as seed, burial as planting, and the afterlife as rebirth. Kings and queens were often seen as earthly incarnations of gods, and in death they returned to those divine origins. The Red Queen, covered in the color of blood, entombed in a pyramid and honored with offerings, was being prepared for rebirth, not as a mortal, but as a being tied to the sacred order of the cosmos. Her burial was not the end of her story, it was the beginning of her legend. Only a few steps away from the Red Queen's final resting area lies one of the maximum iconic tombs in Mesoamerica, that of K-Inish Janab Pakal, known simply as Pakal the Great. His burial in the Grand Temple of the Inscriptions is widely known for its artistry, scale, and deeply spiritual symbolism. But what makes the Red Queen's tomb so amazing is not only what was inside, it is where it was discovered. Her sarcophagus was hidden inside Temple 3, directly adjacent to Pakal's monument. In a city like Palenque, where every temple was carefully placed to reflect cosmic principles, this closeness was no coincidence. It was intentional, a statement etched in stone. Many students agree with the Red Queen was Ixtziakbu Adjo, Pakal's queen and depended on consort. While her tomb lacks inscriptions, the similarities between their burials are striking. Both wrapped in cinnabar, both entombed in pyramids, both buried with jade, and both handled with intense reverence. These rituals reflect each other, as though halves of a sacred narrative. Pakal's lid famously depicts him falling into the underworld tree, a cosmic scene of death and rebirth. The Red Queen's simpler tomb contains no such iconography, but the symbolism lies inside the pairing itself. If Pakal represented the sun traveling through the underworld at night to rise again, then the Red Queen may have represented the moon, the female force that follows its very own mysterious direction in the sky. Together they embodied a cosmic duality, masculine and feminine, king and queen, sun and moon, order and ritual. In Maya mythology, rulership was not singular, it was relational. Harmony in the cosmos required stability, and that stability extended into the dynastic court. By setting the Red Queen beside Pakal, the Maya were maintaining not just a marriage but a cosmic partnership. Their proximity in death may have reflected their roles in life. A queen not behind but beside her king, sharing not only a throne but a legacy in their tombs. They communicate without words, two souls wrapped in cinnabar and stone, joined across eternity in certainly one of history's maximum sacred silences. Though her name was lost to time, the Red Queen of Palenque endures not as a forgotten relic, but as one of the maximum enigmatic and effective women of the ancient world. Her tomb, sealed for over 1,300 years, now whispers across centuries, inviting questions that echo louder with each discovery. She represents a mystery that still resists complete understanding. We may never know exactly who she was. No glyph carved her name. No stela told her story. And yet the care in her burial, the richness of her offerings, the symbolism of her red-soaked bones all speak of a woman profoundly critical, not merely as a wife or consort, but as someone who held real influence, spiritual weight, and royal blood. Today, the Red Queen forces us to reevaluate assumptions. She is a reminder that in the ancient Maya world, women were not silent. They led rituals, governed cities, and formed dynasties. While kings like Pakal have long taken the spotlight, the Red Queen's reemergence reminds us that power did not belong to men alone. It flowed through mothers, queens, priestesses, and visionaries. Her legacy is more than the treasures she left behind. It is the conversation she has commenced among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Every jade bead, every layer of cinnabar, every architectural choice in Temple 3 tells us something deliberate. This female mattered. And perhaps it is the most remarkable part of her tale, not what we know, but what we still do not. The Red Queen teaches us that history is not only a series of facts, it is a living puzzle, a shared human longing to connect with the past. In that sense, her legacy remains unfolding. She lies wrapped in red, the color of life and sacrifice, of blood and rebirth. Her face, once hidden behind a jade mask, now stares back at us through science, art, and wonder. She remains anonymous but not unvoiced, mysterious but not forgotten. The Red Queen may have dominated a kingdom in life, but in death she rules something more, our imagination. Her tomb became sealed in stone. Her story turned into written in silence. And still somehow she speaks. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the colorful district of Coyoacán, then a village on the outskirts of Mexico City. Her adolescence home, the Casa Azul, the Blue House, was full of color, contradiction, and quiet power. It would later become a sanctuary, a battleground, and a museum to one of the most iconic artists of the 20th century. Frida was the third of four daughters born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilda Calderon, a devout Catholic of indigenous and Spanish descent. Her parents were opposites: Guillermo reserved and intellectual, Matilda religious and emotionally remote. Frida would inherit her father's introspection and artistic eye, but also her mother's fierce resilience. As a child, Frida was imaginative, outspoken, and ambitious. She read voraciously and asked questions most adults did not want to answer. But at the age of 6, she contracted polio, which left her right leg thinner and weaker than the other. A physical difference she tried to mask with long skirts but never allowed to limit her spirit. The illness left her bedridden for months and isolated from other children. During this time, she grew close to her father, who encouraged her to exercise, ride bicycles, and stay mentally sharp. Unlike most women of her time, Frida did not aspire to become a wife or a homemaker. Her goal was to become a doctor. She enrolled in the prestigious National Preparatory School in Mexico City at age 15, certainly one of only a handful of women accepted. There she stood out not just for her intelligence but for her rebellious wit, radical thinking, and unique sense of style. She joined a group of young intellectuals called the Cachuchas, who debated philosophy, literature, and politics. Frida became interested in revolution, in ideas that challenged tradition. But even in those early years, before the bus crash that would define her body, and before the reputation that would define her legacy, Frida Kahlo was already painting herself into the world with sharp edges, unapologetic thoughts, and an identity too large to fit inside anyone else's expectations. She was not just growing up in Coyoacán, she was preparing to remake herself completely. On September 17, 1925, Frida Kahlo's existence was split in two: the woman she had been and the woman she was forced to emerge as. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, after school. They had been laughing, teasing each other, and probably arguing. Frida never did anything halfway. But moments later, the bus collided with a streetcar, and in an instant her future unraveled into pain, metal, and silence. The crash was awful. The streetcar crushed the bus against a wall, splintering wood and flinging passengers. Frida was impaled by an iron handrail. It entered her left hip and exited through her pelvis. Her spinal column fractured in 3 places. Her right leg shattered. Her foot dislocated. Her collarbone and ribs broke. Her shoulder was dislocated. Her abdomen was pierced. She was just 18 years old. A man covered her with a borrowed overcoat. Someone else noticed her body was sparkling, not from blood, but from the gold powder she had been carrying in a pouch. It had exploded on impact, dusting her broken form in what seemed like glittering ash. Frida was taken to the Red Cross Hospital and underwent numerous surgeries over the following months. She spent weeks in a body cast, flat on her back, motionless, writhing with infection and uncertainty. The future she had imagined of becoming a doctor slipped further away with each passing day. But in that stillness, something commenced to stir. Her father gave her brushes. Her mother rigged a special easel to hang above her bed. A mirror was placed on the canopy so she could see herself. And there, lying in plaster and affliction, Frida started to paint. First out of boredom, then out of obsession. Her first subjects were her very own reflection, because she was all she had. But what emerged was not vanity, it became survival. The crash had damaged her physically, but it had also opened a door into her own mind, her very own frame, and ultimately into the surreal language of pain and identity that would define her art. The woman who wanted to heal others now started healing herself, one brush stroke at a time. As Frida Kahlo lay encased in plaster and steel, a frame fighting itself with every breath, she started to paint. What began as a form of therapy soon became a language, and that language was deeply personal, brutally honest, and often hard to look at, which was exactly the point. Frida did not paint pretty flowers or polite landscapes. She painted pain, her pain, physical, emotional, and existential. Her first subjects were self-portraits, not because she was vain, but because, as she famously stated, "I paint myself because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." Her early works were small in scale, painted on tin or wooden panels, inspired by Mexican retablos devotional paintings meant to tell stories of suffering and miracles. Frida became this tradition inward. Her body became the canvas. Her emotions became the altar. She painted herself as split, as pierced, as bleeding. In one painting, she is impaled by nails like a modern-day martyr. In another, she floats in a barren landscape, tethered to a broken column, a metaphor for her shattered backbone. She painted herself weeping, fractured, decapitated, and naked, but never passive, constantly looking. Her pain was not sanitized. She painted the ugliness of trauma with beauty, defiance, and even humor. Each piece became a reclamation of her body, her experience, and her identity as a woman in a global that often tried to define her. But Frida was not just telling her story. She was inventing a new kind of visual narrative, one that blended Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical illustration, and symbolism. Her painting became dreamlike autopsies of her soul, framed in color, tradition, and fantasy. By the time she recovered enough to walk again, albeit painfully, Frida was not the woman who had desired to be a doctor. She was an artist, and her art was unlike anything anyone had seen. She had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and grew to become it into a source of creation. Frida Kahlo did not just paint her pain. She made the arena look at it, and in doing so, she became suffering into a sacred act of self-expression. In 1928, still recovering, still painting, and just 21 years old, Frida Kahlo met the man who would become the most profound and turbulent relationship of her life, Diego Rivera. He was 20 years her senior, already Mexico's most famous painter, big in both stature and presence. Rivera turned into a giant of Mexican muralism, known for his sweeping, politically charged frescoes that told the story of the Mexican people. Frida had seen his work before. She appreciated it. But now she wanted his opinion of her paintings. She brought her artwork to him at the Ministry of Education, interrupting his scaffolded work to ask bluntly, "Do I have talent?" Diego took one look and stated, "Yes, and not just out of kindness." He recognized in her something rare, an unfiltered voice, raw and unpretentious, full of rage, irony, pain, and splendor. They started a relationship that became as consuming as it was innovative. Frida once stated, "I suffered injuries in my life. One in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other was Diego." They married in 1929, an uncommon pairing to outsiders. Diego, big, untrue, politically famous. Frida, sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, already walking with a cane. Her parents referred to it as a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Their bond was passionate but chaotic. Diego supported her art and encouraged her growth as a painter, but he was also constantly unfaithful, even with Frida's own sister, Cristina. Frida was devastated, and in return, she took lovers of her own, both women and men, including rumored affairs with Leon Trotsky and painter Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, then remarried a year later with specific terms. This time, Frida would preserve her autonomy, her home, her money, her name. Their second marriage became less about conventional love and more about creative partnership and mutual understanding. In spite of the betrayals and the heartbreak, Diego remained a constant force in Frida's existence. He challenged her, he wounded her, but he also believed in her as an artist, as a revolutionary, and as a female who could redefine what painting might be. Together they were not peaceful, but they were legendary. In the 1930s, Frida Kahlo accompanied Diego Rivera on a journey north to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York as he completed high-profile mural commissions. These years abroad brought her face to face with American industrialism, wealth, and the contradictions of capitalism, and they left her with deep political discomfort. Frida was a proud Mexican nationalist, a dedicated communist, and an admirer of indigenous traditions. The opulence she witnessed in the United States, especially while the Great Depression ravaged much of the country, only deepened her sense of disillusionment. In letters home, she mocked the culture's materialism and obsession with appearances. She missed the grit, color, and contradiction of Mexico. While Diego painted vast murals on factory walls, Frida started to paint smaller, quieter revolutions, deeply personal works on tin and canvas. Her style solidified, sharp, surreal, emotional, and intimate. It was during this time that she produced some of her most iconic self-portraits. Frida did not just paint herself for vanity. She painted herself to survive. Her identity became her landscape. With her frame constantly in pain from her accident, multiple surgeries, and a failed pregnancy in Detroit, she grew inward. Her paintings showed her bleeding, fragmented, exposed, yet her face was always calm, constantly direct, unapologetic. One of her maximum powerful works, Henry Ford Hospital, shows her lying on a hospital bed, crying, surrounded by floating symbols of loss. A fetus, a snail, medical equipment, a cracked pelvis. It was raw, graphic, and deeply emotional, a canvas that bled with reality. Back in Mexico, Frida immersed herself in leftist politics. She and Diego welcomed Leon Trotsky into their home when he lived in exile. Frida wore Tehuana dresses, traditional indigenous clothes, not just as fashion but as a political and cultural statement. Her art was never disconnected from her beliefs. Her identity, her frame, and her ideology all intertwined in her paintings. While Rivera was painting murals of revolution, Frida painted its human cost, the body in pieces, the mind on fire, and the self constantly starring back. In exile and in illness, she became not only a painter of pain, but a painter of resistance. When Frida Kahlo returned to Mexico in the late 1930s, she was not just Diego Rivera's wife. She had become something else totally. A force, an artist whose work radiated with raw honesty, surreal symbolism, and cultural identity. Back in her homeland, she stepped fully into herself. Her Casa Azul in Coyoacan became a sanctuary of color and contradiction. Brilliant cobalt walls, yellow trim, Aztec statues in the garden, monkeys and parrots wandering freely. The house became a living extension of Frida's imagination. It turned into a blend of tradition and revolt, beauty and earth. Here she surrounded herself with pre-Columbian artifacts, ex-votos, folk art, and revolutionary books. She wore ambitious Tehuana dresses, wove flowers into her hair, and painted amid the scent of copal incense and the sounds of mariachi on the road outside. This period marked an explosion of creativity. Her art became more elaborate, more symbolic, and more political. Works just like the two Fridas revealed a divided self, one in European dress with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous apparel, strong and composed. It became Frida's visual autobiography, a portrait of affection, loss, and heritage. In 1939, she exhibited her paintings in Paris, where artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky praised her fiercely unique style. But even among the surrealists, Frida stood apart. When André Breton tried to label her as considered one of their own, she pushed back. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said, "but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my very own reality." She painted Mexico, not the romantic postcard model, but the living, breathing country she cherished. Her work pulsed with symbolism: skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She celebrated the indigenous roots of her hometown, while unmasking the violence of its past and present. But even as her artistic voice grew stronger, Her health continued to decline. Multiple surgeries, infections, and chronic pain became daily realities. Still, she painted through it, propped up in bed, torso bound in corsets, hands clenched around the brush. Frida had returned to Mexico not to rest, but to reclaim her power through paint, through politics, and through her fearless embrace of the self. As the 1940s wore on, Frida Kahlo's body continued to betray her. Her spine became deteriorating. Her right leg was constantly inflamed. She underwent more than 30 surgeries in her lifetime, often in grueling succession. At times, she was bedridden for months, encased in body casts or immobilized by traction devices that stretched her bones apart. But still she painted. Each canvas throughout those years became both a release and an act of resistance. Her works grew darker, more defiant. She painted with a clarity sharpened by pain, refusing to hide behind metaphor. In the broken column, she presents herself split down the middle, her frame pierced with nails, a cracked ionic column replacing her spine, but her face is stoic, her gaze unflinching. Pain for Frida was not just a subject. It became her partner, her antagonist, her muse. Her political voice also grew louder. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in demonstrations, wrote fiery letters, and called out imperialism and injustice. When her health no longer allowed her to walk, she appeared at protests in a wheelchair, defiantly holding signs and shouting slogans. In 1953, Frida was given her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long overdue celebration of her art. But her fitness turned into so fragile, doctors informed her she could not attend. So she did what only Frida would do. She arrived by ambulance, carried in on a stretcher, and placed in the middle of the gallery on her hospital bed. Dressed in traditional finery, surrounded by her very own paintings, she greeted visitors with tequila, laughter, and that fire still burning in her eyes. Her final artworks were both childlike and harrowing. In Marxism will give health to the sick, she painted herself wearing a steel corset, cradled by the palms of Marx, casting away symbols of oppression. Her ultimate known painting became a still life of sliced watermelons, one piece bearing the words "Viva la vida," long live life. Even in the face of death, she remained defiant, happy, and political. Frida Kahlo's last portraits were not just self-pictures. They were acts of revolution, painted in pain but constantly signed with life. On July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo died inside the same place she had been born, La Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The official cause was listed as a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her whispered of something deeper. She had been sick, yes, but also exhausted by pain, by surgeries, by the long conflict along with her own body. Just days before, she had attended a political protest against the CIA coup in Guatemala. Weak and wheelchair-bound, she insisted on going, her clenched fist raised in the air. Revolution remained her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry was short but piercing. "I hope the exit is happy, and I hope never to return." Frida's funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Arts, Mexico's most prestigious cultural institution. Her body, draped inside the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party, was watched over by friends, family, artists, and revolutionaries. Diego Rivera was inconsolable. He called her the greatest love of his life, even though his betrayals had almost broken her. But in the years that followed her death, something exquisite happened. Frida Kahlo refused to vanish. At first, her name was whispered only in art circles. Her works were not easy to categorize, too political for surrealists, too surreal for traditionalists. But slowly, her picture, her story, and her defiance started to resonate. Through the 1970s and 1980s, as feminist scholars and activists reclaimed forgotten voices, Frida's became louder. She was not just a painter anymore. She became a symbol of pain turned into splendor, of feminism born through resistance, of Mexican identity celebrated without apology, of queerness, disability, revolution, and authenticity. Her face, unibrow gaze, flowers in her hair became iconic. Her home became a museum. Her diary became a sacred text. And her paintings now hang in the world's greatest museums. Frida Kahlo had lived much of her life in Diego's shadow, but in death, she stepped forward. She did not just leave behind art. She left behind a mirror and dared us all to look, not with pity, not with fear, but with fire. Today, Frida Kahlo's face is everywhere, printed on T-shirts, painted on murals, turned into dolls, memes, posters, and icons. Her signature unibrow, her flower-crowned hair, her direct gaze, all instantly recognizable. But what makes her legacy effective is not just that human beings know her face. It is that they understand the truth behind it. Frida did not try to be faultless. She did not fit into boxes. She was not conventional, and she did not care to be. In a world that demands perfection, she gave us realness. Raw, messy, colorful, angry, happy, contradictory realness. She celebrated what made her unique, her disability, her queerness, her politics, her culture, and turned it into art that transcended borders and decades. She has become more than an artist. She is a global symbol of defiance, feminism, cultural pride, and creative resistance. For queer groups, she is a fearless bisexual icon who lived openly and unapologetically in a time that demanded silence. For women, she is a reminder that power does not require permission. For disabled artists, she is evidence that pain can fuel the brush, not stop it. And for Mexico, she is a daughter reclaimed, fierce, folkloric, and eternally part of the national soul. Her art, once dismissed as too strange or too personal, are now among the maximum revered in the world. Works just like the two Fridas, self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird, and the broken column are not just seen, they are felt deeply by everyone who has ever suffered and wished to turn that suffering into something sacred. She lived within the margins and became them into center stage. She embraced contradiction, a communist who wore gold, a woman betrayed who loved again, a body in pieces with a soul unbreakable. And through it all, she painted not just with color but with conviction. Frida Kahlo never requested to be a symbol. She simply told the truth about herself. And in doing so, she told the truth for millions of others who had never seen themselves reflected in art before. Now when we see her face, we see courage. We see color. We see resistance. We see Frida, not gone but immortal. Howdy men, tonight we start with the sun-baked, olive oil-slicked global of ancient Greece, a civilization recognized for philosophy, democracy, and statues that did not trust in pants. But underneath the legends of Plato, Sparta, and golden temples lies a much more difficult reality. Because while ancient Greece gave us the roots of Western civilization, it also gave its average citizen a daily struggle you would barely survive today. So before you get cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And allow me to know within the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always charming to see who is joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that smooth background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Welcome to ancient Greece, where your day begins not with an alarm clock, but with the sun turning your private home right into a slow-cooking oven. Your house is a modest one, made from sun-dried dust bricks or rough stone, with small windows and no glass, just wooden shutters to keep out the goats and perhaps some breeze if the gods are feeling generous. There is no insulation, no ceiling fan, and surely no such thing as personal space, unless you count the corner where the family goat does not sleep. You rise early, not because you are disciplined, but because it is already too hot to stay horizontal. In the summer, the stone walls absorb heat like a sponge, and by dawn, your little house is radiating it back into your bones. In winter, those same walls grow into a freezer, and you are essentially wrapped in a sheet, hopping not to end up a statue of frostbite. You probably slept on a thin mat or a straw-filled bed. No pillows, just a rolled-up cloak or maybe your arm. If you are fortunate, the lice left you alone last night, but possibly not. There is no running water. So your morning routine involves both walking to the general public fountain or, if you are rural, hauling water from a nearby well. You carry it in clay jars balanced on your shoulders, while silently praying you do not slip and shatter a week's worth of backache at the ground. To get clean, you do not bathe in the morning. That is stored for the end of the day, if at all. You might splash your face, rub some olive oil on your skin, then scrape it off with a strigil, a curved metallic blade. Consider it as a spa day, but without the spa, the day, or any real impact. And do not even consider privacy. Your family lives within the same room. You sleep together, eat together, and argue over who tracked dust in from the street, because the street is also your hallway, your news feed, and your trash dump. You have not even eaten yet, and already your back hurts. You are sweating, and your tunic is sticking in places no tunic should. And this is the best part of your day. So you have survived the sweat box of a Greek bedroom. Time to fuel up right. Welcome to breakfast in ancient Greece, a meal so minimal it makes modern intermittent fasting look like gluttony. Your first bite of the day. Barley bread, stale, dense, and about as exciting as the dirt it was baked near. It is referred to as maza, made from ground barley mixed with water, shaped into flat cakes, and left to bake either on hot stones or inside the ashes of last night's fire. Think historical granola bar, but without sweetness, texture, or pleasure. You may dunk it in watered-down wine because, surprise, the water is not safe to drink. There is no filtration device, no boiling, no breed a pitcher in your clay pantry. So instead, everyone from children to elders gets a cup of *oinos* blended with water, not for the thrill, but for survival. If you are rich, perhaps you get a fig or two, a few olives, or a smudge of goat cheese. But let's be honest, you are not wealthy. You are lucky if your bread is not crawling with the previous day's flies and does not crack a tooth when you chew it. No coffee, no eggs, no fruit bowl, no honey, unless you live near a decent beekeeper and know how to bribe them. And do not expect to sit and relax. Meals are fast. No chairs, no forks, and certainly no mindful eating. You chew, you nod, and you get back to work. Oh, and if you are a woman, you do not even eat with the men. In many families, women and children eat separately, often after the men are done. So not only is the food bad, you furthermore may get to wait your turn to be disappointed. The irony. Ancient Greeks are the same people who gave us symposiums, banquets, and poetic odes to wine. But breakfast, that is not really worth a line of verse. It is utilitarian, dry, regularly literally burnt, and yet you chew through it like a champion because it is the only thing standing between you and a full day of sun, labor, and arguing philosophers. Bon appetit. Just try not to crack a molar. Now that you have choked down your stale barley brick and a touch of wine water, it is time to clean up, or more accurately, fail to. Because in ancient Greece, hygiene was not so much about cleanliness as it was about ritual and oil. And soap. That is a myth reserved for future centuries. Your morning bath usually entails pouring cold water over your body at the general public fountain or courtyard basin. Unless you are fortunate enough to live near a bathhouse, which most people do not, there is no shampoo, no minty body wash, and no sponge unless you stole one from a sponge diver within the Aegean. Instead, you turn to olive oil. Yes, oil. You rub it into your skin, not to moisturize, but to gather the dirt and sweat. Then you scrape it off using a strigil, a curved bronze blade that leaves you less greasy, but still a bit questionable. Imagine slathering yourself in salad dressing and then shaving it off. That is your skin care routine. And if you think that sounds glamorous, just remember everyone else is doing it too, often in communal settings, naked loudly. Hygiene is social in ancient Greece. Privacy is not. Now let's talk teeth. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste. Perhaps you rub your gums with crushed charcoal or rinse with vinegar if you are fancy. but primarily you chew on a sprig and hope for the best. Dental hygiene is more about divine mercy than routine care. Body scent. Ubiquitous. Deodorant does not exist, but perfumes do for those who can afford them. So you might dab a little myrrh or rose oil on your neck before walking 5 miles in sandals through the Athenian heat. The result, a uniquely Greek combination of musk, dirt, and desperation. Laundry. Rare. Clothes are washed by beating them against stones in the river. If you are poor, your tunic probably has not seen water since last festival season. In brief, hygiene in ancient Greece is not about looking or smelling good. It is about acting reasonably less revolting than yesterday. The oil and scrape technique helps, but only so much when you are sweating in a tunic underneath a sun that is trying to kill you. So yes, ancient Greece gave us democracy, philosophy, and architecture, but a decent shower is still waiting. Now that you have all scraped your way into a new day, it is time to get dressed. And spoiler alert, your ancient Greek wardrobe is minimal at best and comically impractical at worst. You have two options, a chiton or a hamadeion, both essentially oversized linen rectangles that you wrap and pin with a brooch or tie with a belt. It is not tailor-made, it is not fitted. And it certainly was not designed with windy days in mind. One wrong breeze, and suddenly your entire philosophical outlook is on display. Forget underclothes, it is not a thing. And bras do not exist. So unless you are a Spartan woman trained to sprint and fight, you are just hopping your pin's hold, and no one notices your wardrobe moving like a loose curtain. Now let's talk footwear. If you are fortunate, you own a pair of leather sandals. If not, you are barefoot, and that means a full day of walking on sun-baked stone, goat-trodden dust, and whatever the nearby market has squished into the roads. Imagine walking across a skillet in July while dodging donkey dung. That is your daily commute. Of course, there is no sun protection, no hats, unless you are a farmer or sailor, and no sunscreen because you live in 450 C. League. And science has not been invented yet. The Aegean sun. It does not care how philosophical you are, it will roast you. By noon, your shoulders are burned, your feet are filthy, and your linen gown has stuck to you in 4 places that defy geometry. And remember, public nudity is not surprising in Greek society. You may pass men at the gymnasium training in the buff, or even politicians delivering speeches in togas that barely hold together. Now, if you are rich, your tunic is probably dyed, maybe a soft crimson or saffron yellow, but the general public wear off-white or brown because dyes are costly, and no one wants to waste good color on the man who fixes fishnets for a living. So you walk through your day dressed like a toga burrito, sunburned, sweating, and hopping your pin does not pop loose in front of the priestess. And the worst thing, you are only halfway through your chores. Welcome to ancient Greece, where military service is not a job. It is your civic duty, your social expectation, and sometimes your one-way ticket to an early grave. If you are a free male citizen, specifically in Athens or Sparta, congratulations. You are automatically a soldier, whether you like it or not. By your teens, you are already training with wooden weapons and learning formations in the phalanx, that famous Greek battle strategy that involves standing shoulder to shoulder behind huge shields and hopping the fellow next to you does not trip. In Sparta, boys start military education at age 7 in the brutal Agode system, a program that turns children into warriors by essentially starving, whipping, and isolating them until only the toughest remain. In Athens, things are gentler but still mandatory. 2 years of training in your late teens, followed by decades of being on call. You do not get to say, "I am more of a philosopher." Even philosophers like Socrates fought in wars, and not with witty comebacks, with actual weapons. And there is always a war. Whether it is Sparta versus Athens, Athens versus Persia, Sparta versus literally everyone, or only a neighboring polis getting sassy about trade routes, war is a way of existence. Peace is just the pause between invasions. L'armor. If you can afford it, you get a bronze helmet, breastplate, greaves, a round hoplon shield, and a spear. If you cannot, well, try not to be in the front row. Leather and cloth do not stop arrows. The worst thing, you supply your own tools. That is right. Being a soldier is a bring-your-own-bronze scenario. Poorer residents either beg, borrow, or fight gently armed, which is Greek for more likely to die first. And when you are not fighting, you are preparing, training, cleaning weapons, arguing within the assembly about strategy, or rowing warships for hours as part of the military. Because yes, those triremes do not paddle themselves. There is no veterans' health care, no pensions, no therapy, just scars, limps, and the occasional poorly carved headstone praising your virtue and courage. If you think life as a man in ancient Greece sounds hard, just wait till you hear about being a woman. In most Greek city-states, especially Athens, ladies had fewer rights than a pile of decorative urns. You could not vote, could not hold office, could not own land outright, and rarely appeared in public without a male escort. In fact, if people noticed you out too frequently, they might start whispering that you were a courtesan, or worse, a Spartan. Let's start with your daily routine. You wake up before dawn to start the chores. You spin wool, weave cloth, grind grain, fetch water, bake bread, manage the slaves if your household has any, and raise the children. You are the household CEO, but one without pay, respect, or days off. Your social life. Limited. You do not attend plays. You do not join the philosophical debates. You are not at the gymnasium. That is for naked men only. You are limited often to the gynaeceum, the women's quarters, and your contact with the outside world consists of glimpses through latticework windows. Education. If you are fortunate, you might learn to read a little, but usually you are trained in domestic responsibilities. Philosophy, rhetoric, geometry. That is for the men. Your job is to marry well, have sons, and stay invisible while doing it. Marriage happens young, often in your early teens, to someone twice your age, arranged via your father, who treats you more like a trade settlement than a person. Love is optional. Dowries are mandatory. And when you do have children, your primary value becomes your womb. Now Sparta was the exception. Spartan women were famously more liberated. They were informed, exercised in public, and could own property. But before you envy them too much, remember their freedom came from a state-sponsored obsession with war and eugenics. Your primary job as a Spartan female: give birth to strong warriors or face shame. And if your husband dies, you cannot inherit much. You cannot remarry without permission, and your options lessen quicker than your social circle. You are caught legally, socially, and often physically. So yes, the Greeks worshipped powerful goddesses, Athena, Artemis, Hecate, but real women. They had been expected to stay quiet, stay home, and stay out of sight. Ancient Athens is hailed as the birthplace of democracy. And yes, technically it is right. But before you get too excited, let's be clear. You possibly would not qualify to participate. In fact, the general public of people living in Athens were absolutely excluded from the democratic process. To vote in the Athenian Ecclesia Assembly, you needed to be male, born to Athenian parents, a citizen, and over 18. That means women, foreigners called medics, slaves, and children, who made up nearly 90% of the population, had no political voice whatsoever. That is not democracy for the people. That is democracy for a very specific club of sunburned men in sandals. If you met the criteria, though, you did not just vote. You were expected to participate constantly. Laws had been proposed, debated, and passed in huge assemblies of hundreds of residents. There were no career politicians. Every eligible man became part legislator, part jury member, and part overconfident amateur. You could also be randomly selected to serve in powerful positions like running the treasury or serving on a jury via a lottery system, which sounds exciting until you recollect there were no qualifications. Your fishmonger might oversee military logistics one day. Your uncle, who still believes in sea monsters, might choose a murder trial the next day. And if someone got too powerful, too famous, or just annoyed people the wrong way, ostracism. Once a year, citizens could write a name on a broken piece of pottery, an ostracan asterisk, and vote to exile that individual for 10 years. No trial, no defense, just leave. You are getting too famous. And yet, notwithstanding its flaws, Athenian democracy became modern. It gave ordinary men a voice. Well, some ordinary men, and laid the foundation for future political structures. But make no mistake, it was not fair and it was not inclusive. If you were a woman, silenced, a foreign-born resident who paid taxes, silenced, a slave building the Parthenon, certainly silenced, a philosopher who requested too many questions, likely executed. Democracy became born in ancient Greece, But if you had shown up watching for equal rights and inclusive politics, you would have been escorted out of the assembly and told to bring your own ostrachan. In ancient Greece, slavery was not just ordinary, it was expected. Even modest families had at least one slave, not because the family became rich, but because slavery became so deeply woven into society that it felt as normal as sandals and sunburn. The concept that a person might not own another person was practically unthinkable. Slaves were not a specific race or ethnicity. They came from conquered lands, Thracians, Scythians, Syrians, or even fellow Greeks from the wrong city-state at the wrong time. Some had been born into slavery. Others had been prisoners of war. Some had been abducted and sold. It became a thriving, brutal marketplace, and business turned into constantly good. If you lived in Athens, your slave probably did everything. Cooked your food, fetched your water, cleaned your house, cared for your children, carried your shopping, and stood silently during dinner. Some even dealt with business affairs or managed the household while the citizen owner lounged at the symposium, sipping diluted wine and debating abstract concepts like justice, irony level, maximum. In the silver mines of Lorien, slaves, including children, worked in horrifying conditions, crawling through narrow shafts in total darkness, inhaling toxic dust, and dying slowly for the sake of coins and civic pride. Some slaves were informed. They taught grammar and math, served as scribes, or maybe managed bank accounts. But make no mistake, they were still property. They might be beaten, branded, sold, or killed on a whim, and had no legal rights. The few who earned freedom, called freedmen, were never truly free. They still owed loyalty to their former masters and were barred from citizenship. No voting, no land ownership, just the hope of a barely better tomorrow. And unlike later slave systems, there was no widespread abolitionist movement. Philosophers like Aristotle, yes, that Aristotle, justified slavery as natural and necessary. According to him, some people were slaves by nature. Enlightening is not it. Ancient Greece gave us ethics, democracy, and philosophy, but all of it was built at the backs of those who had been never allowed to speak, never allowed to vote, and never allowed to count. And that is not a footnote, it is the foundation. Feeling sick in ancient Greece. That is unfortunate, because unless you live around the corner to Hippocrates himself, your health care plan includes a few vague herbs, divine intervention, and lots of wishful thinking. Let's start with the basics. There are no hospitals as we realize them. If you are sick or injured, you stay home. Maybe a neighbor knows a thing or two about poultices. Maybe a relative recalls a prayer to Asclepius, the god of healing. Maybe your local temple has a snake you can pet for spiritual comfort. That is about it. The most well-known Greek doctors were truly a mix of herbalist, philosopher, and gambler. They believed in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to them, illness turned into caused by an imbalance in those fluids. So if you had a fever, too much blood, time to drain it. Coughing. Too much phlegm, try fasting. Depression. That is black bile. Maybe take a walk or stare at the ocean dramatically. Most remedies had been based totally on trial, errors, and garlic. You might be given crushed poppy seeds, good luck with that, boiled figs, or a compress manufactured from vinegar, and something someone scraped off a goat. Did it work? Occasionally. Did it harm? Almost constantly. A surgery. Rare, terrifying, and generally a last resort. Without anesthesia or antiseptics, even a simple cut could go septic and kill you. Tools included iron knives, bone saws, and prayers. Lots of prayers. And if you wished something amputated, hope you brought a leather strap to bite down on. Midwives dealt with childbirth, which was risky even at the best days. Mortality quotes for women and infants were tragically high. One bad birth, one caught shoulder, one breech baby, and that became it. If you were wealthy, you could summon a traveling physician, someone with an actual scroll and a few fancy oils. If you were poor, you depended on local knowledge, street remedies, and sheer resilience, or you simply did not recover. But hey, at least they believed in rest, easy air, and a balanced diet. So there is that. Ancient Greek medicine gave us the Hippocratic Oath, but it also gave us remedies like drinking boiled cabbage water. So yes, healthcare in ancient Greece, primarily herbs, hope, and hold on. In ancient Greece, theater was not just entertainment. It became a civic responsibility, a religious ritual, and sometimes a full-contact sport for the soul. Let's start with the best part. Theater became free for citizens. Assuming you were not a woman, slave, or foreigner, in which case, good luck seeing anything. You would file into an enormous outdoor theater carved into a hillside, just like the great theater of Dionysus in Athens, shoulder to shoulder with thousands of other sweaty citizens. And you would be there all day. Seriously, all day. The Dionysia festival ran from sunrise until night with back-to-back plays, tragedies, comedies, and satyr plays. No intermission, no snacks, and surely no restroom breaks unless you counted a bush at the hillside. If you showed up late or acted out, you were not just frowned at, you could be fined. The performances themselves. Wild. Tragedies had been emotionally gutting. Murder, madness, war, gods destroying families because of one bad decision made 3 generations ago. You did not come to laugh, you came to weep in unison. Then came the comedies, which were not exactly light-hearted family fare. These plays mocked politicians, philosophers, whole cities, and bodily functions with stunning precision. Imagine if Saturday Night Live and a college debate had a child, then dressed it in a massive phallic costume and sent it on stage. Actors wore towering masks, platform shoes, and exaggerated costumes, all male, of course, even for women's roles. The chorus sang, danced, and shouted commentary like an ancient Greek version of Twitter, only louder and wearing tunics. And this was not passive viewing. The audience became loud. They booed, hissed, threw things, and argued mid-performance. Theater was democracy with stage lighting. If the play offended you, you let them know. If it moved you, you shouted, wept, and perhaps reevaluated your life. At the end of the festival, a jury voted on which playwright won. Imagine spending 3 days crying over Orestes, only to discover some bawdy comedy with a speaking pig god took the prize. That is ancient Greece for you. So yes, in the theater, you were never just watching. You were participating and likely throwing olives. So you have survived your tragic, all-day theater binge. Now you wander into the agora, the bustling heart of the city, and stumble right into a man wearing a cloak, holding no footwear and asking strangers, "What is justice?" Welcome to philosophy. It is everywhere, and it is not optional. In ancient Greece, specifically in Athens, philosophy became the local sport, and the champions were names we now associate with world-changing ideas. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Back then, though, they had been just eccentric men who talked a lot and made other people feel stupid. Take Socrates. The man made a career out of asking questions that led nowhere and dismantling people's confidence in their own opinions. You might be minding your own business, buying olives or petting a stray goat, and he would appear. Do you believe in truth? Well, I guess. What is truth? Cue 3 hours of intellectual spiral and a decision to move to Sparta. He never wrote anything down. His student Plato did that. But Socrates left a long-lasting influence, partly because Athens eventually executed him for being too annoying. Formally, it was corrupting the young people and not believing within the gods, but let's be honest, he probably just would not stop asking questions during dinner. Philosophy was not a comfortable academic hobby. It turned into loud, confrontational, and weirdly athletic. Debates befell in public spaces. They had been spontaneous, intense, and often resulted in hurt feelings or deep existential crises. No microphones, just voices, hands, and enough ego to fill the Parthenon. And if you thought you could just watch, think again. Philosophers loved drawing in random bystanders. You did not walk past Plato's academy. You were absorbed into it. You said one thing slightly wrong, and all of a sudden became the day's example of unexamined existence. Even children were not safe. Aristotle tutored Alexander the Great, a teenager who later conquered half the known world. Imagine your high school civics teacher handing you a globe and saying, "Go fix this." So yes, philosophy gave us logic, ethics, science, and political concept. But in ancient Greece, it also gave you a headache, a crisis of identity, and a 70% chance of being publicly humiliated by someone in sandals. So you have made it in ancient Athens. You are well-spoken, smart, politically active. People like you, perhaps too much. That is your first mistake, because in Athens, being too popular could get you kicked out of the city for 10 years. Not arrested, not fined, just gone. This was not a conspiracy or a backroom deal. It became built into the system. It became called ostracism, and it was perfectly legal, perfectly public, and perfectly terrifying. Once a year, the citizens of Athens would assemble to decide whether or not to hold an ostracism vote. If enough people agreed, everyone wrote the name of someone they wanted exiled on a broken piece of pottery called an asterisk ostracan asterisk. If someone got 6,000 or more votes, they were banished. No trial, no explanation, just pack your sandals and leave. You did not have to be a criminal. In fact, most ostracized human beings had performed nothing wrong, except get too influential. Maybe you were a war hero, a persuasive speaker, or simply had incredible hair. Whatever it was, your fellow citizens decided you were becoming a threat to democracy, and democracy voted to yeet you into temporary oblivion. And here is the twist: it was not permanent. Ostracism lasted 10 years, and then you could come back like nothing happened. Your property was untouched. Your citizenship remained. No grudges, just a decade-long holiday you did not ask for. Some famous Athenians were ostracized. Aristides the Just turned into so well-liked that someone allegedly voted against him, just because they were sick of hearing how virtuous he was. Brutal. Even Themistocles, the military genius who saved Athens at the Battle of Salamis, got the boot once he got too cocky. Seems gratitude has an expiration date. Ostracism was supposed to protect Athens from tyrants, but it frequently punished success. So if you were ambitious, you had to walk a fine line, be respected but not too respected, popular but not charismatic enough to fear human beings. Think of it like a reality show where